Welcome to the Honest Designers Show, your transparent look into life as a modern designer. My name's Tom and I'm the founder at designcuts.com, and this week I'm joined by fellow Brit and prolific hand letterer Ian Barnard, our American retro design loving friend Dustin Lee, and the incredibly talented South African illustrator that is Lisa Glanz. In this week's episode, we talk all about design theory. Design is pretty subjective, but there are some things you probably should be doing to level up your design work. Today, we dig into the design theory that helps each of us to progress our own work and careers. You should come away from this episode armed with some practical tips for improving your regular design projects. Let's get into the show. Okay, so this week we're talking all about design theory, and this is something we've kind of touched on in a few past episodes. Everything from how do you learn the theory, if that's formal education, like how do you get inspired by others and stuff. But I think this week my question really is kind of what makes a good design. And I know that's really subjective, but do you guys know what I mean? Like when you start out, you kind of know your work sucks and you look up to other people's, and there's definitely a gauge for when I think the theory starts kicking in, whether that is learned at college or just through sheer experience. You start to put design work together better.
Yeah, also, when you mentioned this topic, I started thinking about how different, the basics of design theory obviously is there no matter what you do, but how different each genre really is, from magazine design to web design to brochure design to packaging design. It's quite, I think a lot of designers forget that they need to actually look at who your audience is and what the product is that you are designing, and then adjust the design theory accordingly, if I can call it that. But yeah, it's quite a I think there's some basics that you've got to follow no matter what you do.
Okay, like what?
Well, for me, and I guess everyone might be different, but for me, it's got to be easy to understand and easy to read. I mean, that's the first. If you can't read what it is that you're trying to say, or your packaging or whatever, then you've missed the mark. The next thing for me is there's got to be a focal point, because if your eye is flying all over the place, then the viewer or audience or customer gets confused. So I think there's got to be one really good focal point, and then support everything that around that's got to kind of support that focal point.
Okay, and just to dig into that, because
yeah.
I think that's kind of become second nature for us hopefully over the years, but I think the focal point thing is huge, and that can range from I don't know if you guys have seen like the different letters for web design, where it's like an F shape or a Z shape where the eye goes like from left to right and then kind of diagonally down, all that kind of stuff. The same thing happens for a lot of graphical design, where often you might want to lead it in a circle or something around a poster, or you have a center point and you don't want the eye almost like leaking out beyond the bounds of the poster or the composition or whatever. You want to really kind of draw it round almost like a spiral, and it becomes, when you actually learn that stuff and experience it, it becomes really interesting to almost manipulate the viewer through your design theory work.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, as you just said, to guide the viewer where you want them to look first, and then next, and so on and so on and so on. If it's kind of a mess and people sense that, even though they don't really know how to verbalize that, they often just sense the fact that this is a bad design, but it's actually just because it's chaotic, and there's no, you haven't led them the way you haven't made it easy for them, should I say, the journey of looking into the piece.
I'm glad you mentioned chaos, because something kind of sprung to mind, and I think you shouldn't design just by kind of complete trial and error or happy accident, because it can end up being chaotic. You need to be a bit deliberate about your design work, but at the same time you should really be finding a happy medium. So you can't design by a maths formula. you can't like plug in some numbers and spit out a design. So it can't be entirely based on like existing theories or frameworks.
No.
But you're kind of guided by those, and then you're trying to balance that with your sheer creativity and abstraction. And I think it, as I say, it meets in the middle. So it's like your theory guides you, the creativity is what makes it hopefully interesting, and you need a little bit of both. But if you go full on creativity most of the time, unless you're doing some seriously abstract art, you know, if you're doing work for clients or whatever, you need that foundation of theory to guide the piece.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's just going to end up being a big mess where, you know, the user's eyes all over the place, or it doesn't make sense, or it doesn't fit the client brief, or whatever it might be. It's just going to be a bit of a shambles.
And I think that's the art form, isn't it? Because it's having the ability to take, it's almost, I always think that of designers as like problem solvers, because you're taking you're taking an existing problem of how do I get this message across, or how do I solve this, I don't know, advertising dilemma or whatever, and then finding ways to incorporate the theory behind getting people's attention and, you know, getting the eye to move around correctly, getting your message across clearly, but at the same time injecting creativity, and whether it's you want it to be really beautiful and sleek, or corporate and, you know, formal or whatever. So that's I guess the art of it all, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm feeling bad because before the call, I think we talked about the boys over talking.
Yeah, is that saying a word?
Years to go, and now Dustin and Ian, you've gone eerily quiet. So I feel
just
like
being polite little boys.
You look like you've been reprimanded, sat over there.
Make sure the ratio was larger for Lisa. So
yeah, no, I think we need 80% Lisa.
No,
yeah.
No, I completely agree with Lisa.
I agree
what
with
do you guys
Lisa too.
think? Cool. Okay, so back to Lisa. No, Dustin, Ian, what do you think? So design theory, what springs to mind where it's like what elevates it from being amateur work to perhaps being a bit more deliberate and having some finesse?
Obviously, practice. I know when I started, there's the famous talk that the dude from This American Life, what's that guy's name? Ira Glass talks about. You have taste, but you can't do what it is you want to do, even though you know what good taste is. So it takes a while to get to that point. But after you get to that point, what I think is important is, like Lisa said, hierarchy. So creating a hierarchy so people know where to look first, and then everything should support that. Secondly, and this might be because I'm really into copywriting and marketing, I'm fascinated by that. I think that for me, I enjoy design that's disruptive. So it should wake you up from the kind of hypnotized way we live life, where you see something and it snaps.
Have an emotional connection.
Yeah, it snaps you out of it and wakes you up to pay attention to what's happening. And then lastly, something that occurred to me that all designers should do that will make them better designers, in my opinion, is they should sell something. I sell design goods. All of us sell design goods, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be selling your own t-shirts or your own jellies, whatever it is. I think that selling something helps you to understand how a customer's mind works when they look at design and what makes them actually make sales. Because at the end of the day, design is about getting people to do something. So it's not just about hierarchy. It's not just about that. It's about getting the user to do something, not getting their eye to just track across a screen or across a package in a way. So I think all designers should sell something so they know how to do it for their customers. If you haven't done that, how do you know you actually know how to do it?
Yeah, good point.
100%. And you're basically becoming your own client in that respect, which I think you can learn tons from beyond even just theory. But yeah, when you talk about doing something, that doesn't have to be a sale. You know, a street sign that points to the right is a design which gets someone to do something.
Right.
Hopefully, unless they're a really rebellious driver. And there's definitely a spectrum there whereby it could be something that's simple, which is kind of nailed by a basic symbol, or it could be a really convoluted like brand revamp where it's a huge company and there's a billion moving parts, and that's where it gets a hell of a lot more complex because you're trying to juggle all these things and find balance, and there's a vast audience where half of them might hate it and half might love it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to understand with theory you can very much start with the basics. It's like when you're a kid, right? You learn how to draw a circle and then a triangle, and then you start understanding what some of these mean and what different colors mean, and you can take it one step at a time, and kind of move up that spectrum. But if you really want to push the boat, it would be, in my eyes, something like a huge rebrand project is about as complex as it gets.
That's for sure. That's a big
What do you think, Ian? Any standout theory elements that you find really help with your work or were great starting out?
I feel that I didn't have a great theory or the explanation of theory that was that great when I was at college. I learnt most of it from other designers who'd been through that experience and had given me that knowledge while I was working with them. So it really helped for me for my first job to be like an intern, or the sort of basic art working person within that environment, and all these other people would have years and years of experience. So I would do something and they would say, this would look better because of this, because of that. And that's where I go, oh, okay, I couldn't see that until they pointed it out, and then I could see it within other elements, and I wouldn't do that same mistake, or it wasn't necessarily a mistake, but I think it's there's like to use 3 words is like beauty in balance, or balance in, like, for instance, here's an example. Learning about when you're doing placing text and large amounts of text, something like orphans and widows, and if you know that, where you have a last line of a paragraph and just one word is sitting on that line, and you would try and adjust it so it wasn't just that one word like sitting on the line, because then it would balance that paragraph out. And I didn't know that at the beginning until someone had pointed it out to me and explained that theory to me and why we use that theory. And so that was really helpful to me, because I could then make sure that when I came to jobs like that again, I would then balance that text by just making sure that I just maybe tighten up the text or push it aside, but making sure that even within that, expanding the text or condensing the text, it wasn't over the top, so it was irreadable because there was no space between. There was a limit to how much you could adjust it, and so there's lots of different tricks and stuff that you would use to force those words onto that page, so it made a nice balanced amount of text. So I think through, I suppose they were mentors. The other designers became mentors to me to know how to do things. And also, I did a lot of stuff where I had to put, I had to do some new business cards for a company. They had brand guidelines, and everything was laid out. You had a certain measurement from the edge of the business card, and I would have to follow all that. And I could see why they did it, because it just gave it, it gave the logo prominence. There was hierarchy in where the person's name was, the job was, and stuff like that. So I think just experience, looking what other people were doing and being explained to as well. Yeah. Because, like you say, you can look at something and say, well, I know it doesn't look right, but I don't know how to make it work. And that's why you need someone else around. Whether that's, if you go to a good college, good university, you'll get that, but not
I don't
everyone
think fully necessarily.
Does get that, so.
Yeah, I think certainly some designers would not like the idea of that kind of almost donkey work, right? Where it's like you're being told exactly what to do and you simply have to drop content in. But that's really interesting, because you've just painted a picture of why that's incredibly helpful, because it actually makes you better and makes you understand the theory, even if you're just dropping in elements and doing layouts and stuff.
It's not glamorous, and it was the only way I could get a job in the beginning. This was back in 2000, so there was no social media. I couldn't just jump out like a lot of people can do now and jump straight into either a job or just straight into freelance. And so to get so I think even though it was quite boring sometimes just doing text placing, it did give me some good fundamentals for later on when I was designing my own stuff, and I could then balance it out and make sure it all looked right. So I think
I was just going to agree with you, Ian, because I actually think typesetting is a brilliant basic skill to have as a designer, because it teaches you all those fundamentals that you just mentioned. I mean, my first job was also dealing with a lot of text. I worked on a magazine as a magazine layout artist, and yeah, it's just basically balance was a huge thing, and manipulating text and the whole tracking and kerning and all those things that you just mentioned. It was a huge platform for me to understand the basics of design, because you can actually take those basic elements of dealing with text and transform them into use them in designing a page or a poster or whatever, so I think if you can get experience in, it's mundane as you said, but it's so worth it. I think it's really worth it.
I think the fundamentals to typography are something that any designer needs to really learn. If you had because if you're just using photos, then you're just a photographer, because a designer will never just use photos and no text anywhere. Same with if you're an artist, you just do art. If you start combining it with text, that becomes design.
Yeah, exactly.
It is the fundamental. If you wanted one thing that every designer needed to learn, I think it's the fundamentals of typography.
I agree.
Because that every product you see, every magazine you see, every logo, every website, everything contains text. So if you can get that, and there's plenty of books that you can get if you just wanted to read up on it, but there's plenty of courses, I think. And so if you had one thing, I think that would be it.
It's interesting because a lot of this stuff, I remember when I first started design, I was so stressed out about staying in a grid, and I read the Making and Breaking the Grid or whatever it was, and the typography books, and I was so paralyzed because there was so many rules, and I tried to follow them all, and it did help. But it's interesting because the typography stuff applies to a lot of stuff that isn't typography too. There's a lot of common sense things. You could almost make the Tao of typography and probably apply it to life.
Yeah.
That sounds really weird, but
very philosophical.
But I think you could, because there's so many things that are just common sense things that maybe you don't think about balance and about readability and making things easy. Because the whole point of typography, it's complicated when you get into the details, but the whole point is to make it so you don't notice it and so you read smoothly through things.
Correct. Yeah.
The interesting counterbalance to it, I'm curious how you guys feel about this, is I think I've mentioned this before, this Dr. Bronner soap. I have it in my bathroom. I always think about it. It's this typography that's all crushed in there. The guy wrote it looks like on a typewriter and crushed as much stuff as he could into the packaging.
Yeah, you showed this to us.
Yes, and you can't read it unless you really try. It doesn't make any sense. It has nothing to do with soap whatsoever. It's not even talking about the benefits of soap. But the soap sells like crazy, and it's because of this packaging, and it's horrible. So
but is
that bad design, or by design is it brilliant because it broke so many rules and was so awful? Like, is it good or bad?
I think good. And I saw it and it stuck out to me. And that's probably what they're trying to do.
Well, I think that's it. I mean, if it becomes something else, the bad design becomes good design because it's now the element of attraction, I guess.
Or like the Sex Pistols cover, right? For God, what's it called?
God Save the Queen.
God Save the Queen. It looks.
Oh, the Brits knew that one, of course.
Just thrown together. I don't know if it really was or not, but you look at it and you say,
great.
That's brilliant.
I love that artwork.
It stands out because of that. Was that professionally designed?
Well, you could say the same for their music. Probably it's not the most refined, but definitely works.
But they were against conforming to what the world, So let's use loads of different typefaces because people didn't use loads of different typefaces. So you can see why they used it, because it translates over a message of what they were doing. So I think obviously you can break these rules and it can become a brand, you not sticking to the rules, like the soap and like
be part of
the cover of that. I think it's just if you're doing a product for like...
But would we say it's good design? Is that good design when that happens? Or is that bad design that happened to get lucky?
Well, if it's intentional and it's successful, actually, even if it's not intentional, if it's a happy accident and it's successful, then it's good design.
Because it becomes a piece of artwork, doesn't it? And that collection, if you try to do that on something else, it might not work. It's because of where the application is being put into it.
Right. Yeah. Like if you put that on a prescription a prescription bottle in God Save the
It's
Queen
not gonna
style,
work.
it would probably be a horrible idea.
Yeah.
It's like why you would choose you wouldn't choose a Gothic typeface, black letter Gothic typeface for a maybe like a bouquet of flowers.
I was waiting
There's
for that.
reasons why certain
You wouldn't choose
typefaces
Comic
work with
Sans
certain-
for a funeral parlour.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Like for a men's gym, you wouldn't use a modern
flowery
calligraphy swirly thing, would you? You'd use one that was bold and maybe
chunky,
a slab serif
yeah.
that had strength to it. That would
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're opening a massage parlor or anything to do with new age health, you need papyrus. It's just you need it. If you don't have the papyrus, the whole thing falls apart. So it just depends on how you're using this stuff.
Yeah.
and obviously Comic Sans just comes in a whole ream of itself.
So as we're kind of circling around this, something I'm a big believer in is basic design. Like the simpler the design is, the more difficult it is. I don't know if you guys felt that, but I really struggle. I find it a lot easier when you're doing some pretty complex design work and there's loads going on. That's quite a lot easier to kind of draw the eye around. I can mock up something basic, but I never seem to instantly hit that kind of high level look. So for example, if someone asks you to do them a business card and they said, I just want a plain black background, I want my name in the center and like a tagline underneath that. There's so little going on there that you have to absolutely nail every single kind of pixel of it and every positioning of it
a lot
and
of
every
pressure.
font and how the fonts combine and every bit of kerning and how it's going to look printed. And it'll be something that simple. I find that like maddeningly difficult to design around.
Really?
But throw like a complex website or like a complex photo manipulation at me and I can just get running with it. Whereas anything basic, like I tried designing a personal site for myself the other day, and I was doing it kind of minimally, like I'm some big brand, which I'm definitely not, so it wasn't even the right fit. But it was just like my name, some social media links, and then a background image. And I really struggled because it was so simple.
Yeah.
I just kept
Well,
revising
there's
it.
no
and
way
it
to
didn't feel right.
hide, I guess.
Yeah,
No, there
exactly.
really isn't. But I would advocate that for anyone listening. Try and do a more simple design than you're used to, because I really think that makes you focus on improving your theory. You have to nail it. And something that I see a lot is if you get someone who's either an amateur designer or not a designer, if they ever make the claim of like, oh, well, that's simple, I could do it, and then you get them to try and do it, it looks abysmal. And some of the common stuff, I think, is we've already talked about hierarchy, but I think alignment is a big one. So if you ever see a poster or a website or anything and everything's kind of left aligned but slightly out, like it's not pixel perfect aligned, even if it's like 2-3 pixels to the right on that one and 1 pixel to the left on the other one, most people wouldn't even notice that, but subconsciously you're like, oh, that doesn't feel as together.
Yeah.
Like it's something slightly off, and it'll be tiny little details like that. And then stuff like the balance of color, as I mentioned, font combinations. It's all these fiddly little things, and I think that's the stuff that practice lets you get better at, where you can just inherently do it, or at least struggle with it less. But that stuff is really tough, and I don't know about you guys, but I actually just learned that by copying people. So it would be something like I'd see a logo and maybe the slogan has really big kerning on it and tracking on it, and it's done in quite an elegant way. So I would actually go and find a similar font and do the same thing and be like, okay, that looks okay, but there still looks better. So if you try and mimic it, like down, I'm not saying mimic it and then go and sell that or do it for a client, but if you try and actually see work that stands out to you, first of all, think why does that stand out and why does it look so good? If you try and replicate it side by side, it's actually really difficult. And you could have every word in the same place, but use a slightly different font or a slightly different color, and theirs will look so sleek and so perfect, and yours looks terrible by comparison.
I agree. There's a parallel between that and guitar playing. So when you're learning to play guitar, you learn a lot of other people's songs, And by doing that, you feel like you're living in their brain a little bit, because as you play it, you're playing through someone else's thought process, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when you do that in design, if you see something like you're saying, Tom, and you like how the tracking is done or something, and you do that, you get the experience of, I think, how it feels to be that person when they made it. And it's not about copying it. It's about trying to understand how it feels when things lock up right.
Yeah.
I found that to be tremendously helpful.
Well, I think that's a sign of experience, and I like the guitar metaphor because you play guitar, I play guitar as well, not as well as you, unfortunately. But if you can learn all the notes and you repeat the notes, but then the world-class guitar player, he will have the right intonation and better timing and put more feeling into it somehow, and lets notes carry. And as you say, Lisa, real subtle stuff. And not only that, but it might take you 3 weeks to learn it, and it will take him half an hour.
Yeah.
And I kind of get the same thing where I've seen videos of Aaron Draplin doing his logo stuff. It's stuff that we could probably all replicate, but he'd do it so quickly and so efficiently, and it's such second nature for him, like all of this balance and all the subtle design theory. He just does it kind of perfectly off the bat. I think that is a sign of experience, like I say.
Well, it's interesting because you'll sorry about that. You want to do it rock, paper, scissors?
Yeah, got it.
1, 2, 3. Okay, you win.
Ian, you go.
Ian, take it.
And actually, there's a really good, because I was doing his Skillshare class he'd done recently, and even with a font that's been around for ages and it's is close to perfect, still has its elements that don't quite work. And he showed how don't be at the mercy of just like we're looking at fonts and typography, the mercy of either the application you're using or the font that you're using, that you can tidy things up and make it bespoke. If you're doing a logo, don't just type in the words and then just leave it. If it doesn't look right, then adjust it yourself. Don't be stuck within what the...
That's a good tip. Same thing with graphics, right, as well?
Yeah. So don't just take one off the shelf and say that's it.
It's not working and try and get it to
like
fit.
with furniture or something like that. Because what I'm hoping at some point, once I save enough money, to have a studio down the end of my garden, because this is quite a small area, and rather than just buy pieces of furniture from IKEA, I'm going to actually make it myself, like from scaffolding poles and bits, because I want to make a specific stuff that's going to really work well for. So an overhead table for have a camera on it. You don't go into a shop and buy one of those. You have to make it yourself. So, I could buy some stuff and then adjust it, but make sure that you don't just use something just because you got it off a shelf, because they made it generic so multiple people can use it, but it might not work for your application. But you have the, make sure you have the skills to then, use it. Like you were saying about your lining up stuff, Tom, is that sometimes even it's lined up within, say, InDesign or Illustrator, actually there's like a slight gap between the first letter and the edge of the box. So you have to actually adjust it yourself and see where that line is actually coming down. And that's where some people come undone. They just, get all the boxes to align together. But the problem is within those boxes, the letters might be moving around and stuff like that. So don't just be at the mercy of the computer, of the program, and of the font.
Yeah, and also
I completely agree.
Also, people often stick to. I mean, obviously, you use your guides. I mean, I use my guides strictly, but sometimes the optical illusion, even though it's lined up, it doesn't look lined up. So that as you were saying, don't always just assume just because the computer said right, it's it's bumped up to this guide, it's actually lining up. Your eye is telling you something else, so you must adjust accordingly. But
speaking of it,
sorry, go for it.
Go ahead.
And I was just going to say, I'm a bit the opposite to you, Tom. I actually dislike. I used to dislike a whole lot of stuff to work with. I used to prefer just very simple copy and stuff like that. And my favorite thing to do was actually to take. Often clients used to give me their old newsletters that a previous designer used to do for them. And my favorite thing to do was to rework it so quickly, like just to show them like a few basic things to make it, just to elevate it to the next level of it looking more elegant. And it would actually mean cutting out half the text, you know, because I know everybody says just add more white space, but ironically, that often is all you need to do.
I love reworking stuff like that.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite work I used to do was redesigns of people's websites and so on. And it's really satisfying because for me, often the scary part is just a blank canvas. Whereas it's so awesome to get hold of something that is perfectly fine to most people, but you know isn't that good.
Yeah.
And that's what I actually find really easy, is where you get hold of it and you strip bits out and you adjust them and you use all the stuff you've learned as a designer. And the comparison before and after is
amazing.
Normally pretty staggering. And I just find that so satisfying, how much you can improve it based on a few little principles that you know are innately part of your arsenal now.
Yeah.
I tell you what, if you really want to learn, like when you're just like with what Lisa was saying about redoing copy and making it look nice. I remember in my first job, I had to. We were doing an internal Honda magazine, and it was in 20 different languages. And it was fine when it was like French and Spanish, but when it came to German, and you had one word which went like was over a whole width of the column, and you're like, I don't know where to break this up, and you know, just you would have to adjust so much, and it's just through sheer experience, you just you would just know how to do stuff. Yeah. So and I suppose if you want that, you can just pick up a newsletter that comes through your door and just have a go at trying reworking it. Just say, how can I make this better? How can it doesn't look lined up? Doesn't look like they're using something I used to use was a baseline grid. Yeah. Just being able to look at stuff and see, okay, it's not right, but let me play around and see if I can make it look right. It is just invaluable experience and knowledge you'll get from that.
Yeah.
I just had a really cool idea. I've just had a business idea on this call. So I'm going to share it with you guys, and I want to hear from listeners if they like it. So I remember a few years back, there was a stock photo site that basically teamed up with photo manipulators who created these incredible like fantasy works of art. And I think it was for a week or maybe a month, they provided their PST source files. So you could download it and basically go through all their layers and see how they'd built stuff. And that's the only example I've seen of something like that. But I would love to do that with this more minimal graphical work and that kind of thing, where if you got a typographic poster or a bit of brand work or something, and maybe that's something we can do, because I know you guys have some examples of that where it's got great balance and all the theory in there. And I would find it so interesting personally to actually download the source files of it, move a few things around and start seeing why that makes it worse, because presumably you've landed on the best iteration of that. So if you start moving that text to the right and changing the size, and suddenly that original lovely design becomes a bit lost, and being able to kind of reverse engineer the great design craft that's gone into it.
Yeah.
I like that though. And you could ask a few people and be like, do you mind providing just an example file of your stuff? And people can really understand theory by doing instead of just kind of seeing or talking about it.
In a lot of the retro supply products that are partnership products or products that I've done myself, will offer the source file to go with it. And we use that exact term to reverse engineer it. So here's how, for instance, with a Brad Woodard, who's this great illustrator, here's how he built it up. You can look at it. You can't take it and go use it on something, but you can see how did he layer up his colors? How does he organize his files? Because it's so useful to see that.
It is. It's behind the scenes. So otherwise you just go, how the hell did they create that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's very rarely places where you can see that done. So I think it is extremely useful.
Cool. Well, we'll circle back to that one. But if someone's listening and would like to kind of get their hands on some source files from some of the greats, I'd love to try and reach out. I don't mean us by that, by the way. I'm sure we can provide some bits, but no, we can reach out to some big dogs in the industry and see if they'd be willing to kind of give something back in that respect.
So to step back for a second, I wanted to add something about, Ian had talked about Aaron Draplin's latest class. I'm presuming you're talking about his lettering class where he talks about, or typography and customizing typography. he says something so small but so great about him that I think everyone should do. Is he was talking about Helvetica or something. He didn't like how a certain little part of the letter was done. And he just changed and said, is this right? I don't know. Probably some typography fanatics are freaking out or having mental breakdowns that I'm doing this right now. Or he was kerning things so tight they were overlapping. And he was saying, this is probably making some people really upset, but whatever. This is what I like. This is how I do it. And I love that way of thinking. I think sometimes design is so elevated to this fancy pantsy thing. And I guess it can be that, but I like that Aaron's like that. It makes me feel like, well, I can do it. It's okay to go in and if you don't like how something looks, change it. If you want to pull things tight together, do it. Is it
trial and error, right?
Yeah. I mean, break rules,
break
trial and
things,
error.
What's the worst that can happen? You have to go on the history panel.
Right. It might be rubbish. I'm borrowing your guys' word, but it's worth trying. You should do stuff that you like to do. And you should screw up. If you don't screw up, you're probably not having enough fun.
I think especially if you're struggling, you know, if you're going over the same, like you've been staring at the same layout for the last 2 hours and it's just not getting there anywhere, it's a good idea to then, you know, mess around and start breaking rules, and because I think that's the only way you're going to solve your problem, you know. You can't just keep going round and round in the same circle. It's not going to help. I
picture you working when you were an art director and drawing little woodland creatures in the corners to release some stress, and then one day you were just like, let's just do that.
I would love to see your doodles.
Actually, you know, I never did that. My stress relief was, it's just so weird. I had the weirdest.
Please don't say something scandalous.
I don't know. I had the most opposite design style that I do now. It's bizarre. I was very minimalistic, very. So,
really?
Yeah.
I can't picture that. All your stuff's so cute now.
Yeah.
And your doodle's just like a perfect cube or something.
Yeah.
So you have to post some stuff to Instagram.
Yeah, I need to. I need to.
We want to see
find
old
some of
school
my
stuff.
old design stuff. Yeah.
There should be a site like Hall of Shame where everyone puts their stuff from when they first started.
Oh no, I would not share it. The reputation of the podcast would plummet very swiftly.
There was a quote that someone's, I can't remember who it was, I saw this week, which was, if you're not embarrassed by the work you did last year, then you're not growing.
Oh, but it's so true. Oh my word, who said that? Because that is just so true.
I can't remember. I feel
I
bad
love it though.
I
I get that all the time. I get that even
daily?
6 months ago.
yeah,
daily.
Straight after
yesterday was a real sham. Yeah.
No, but it's so true. If you're not, it's scary. But then again, every now and then you look back and you find a little gem.
Or sometimes you look back on something that I look back on things I never put out and I say, that was pretty good. I was a little too harsh on myself. Most often I say I really sucked, but
I was going to say you've got a nicer internal critic than I do. Okay, so hopefully that's a good point to leave it for everyone. But I would say, really just get in and break things, trial and error, pay attention to what's working. Go take some courses as well, because all four of us are trying to learn still all the time. So just, I think it's definitely worth learning the theory. And if anything, I think we mentioned Picasso in a previous episode. It's great to learn the theory because often it makes you more creative rather than stifling your creativity.
Yeah, and never stop learning, because I think that's super important. No matter where you are in your journey, you can always learn.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. We hope that it shed some light on some effective ideas around design theory to help you to improve your creative work. As always, you can find full show notes over at honestdesigners.com or find us over on iTunes by searching for The Honest Designers Show. If today's episode helped you, then it would mean the world to us if you took a brief moment to leave us a review on iTunes, as this is a great way for other creatives to discover the show. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week right here on The Honest Designers Show.